So in today's quick tip, I'm going to talk about stuck synchronizer rings, why it happens, and how you can prevent that from happening. You see, lately I've been seeing a lot of people purchasing new transmissions, especially from Jegs or Summit, and actually some new transmissions from other people, and then they complain that the transmission is stuck in two gears at once. Actually, it's probably just the synchronizer ring got jammed up against the gear during shipping, or the transmission is bone dry and people are trying to shift the dry transmission on the bench, which is something you should never do, by the way. But let me give you a little quick tip on why this happens and how you can prevent it as a builder, so that when you ship that transmission out to somebody, you don't have to worry about the synchronizer ring getting jacked up against the gear and stuck to it and getting a bunch of complaints later on. Let's get to it. So here I have a used gear, and here I have a brand new gear. I think this is an early T10 gear, and this is a super T10 gear. This particular problem happens with any type of synchronizer ring that's a bronze or brass type of ring and a gear cone. Now, on all the gears, these finishes were ground, and the finishes were very nice and precise and very smooth. It's the best way I can explain it. And in operation, the ring actually burnishes to the gear. It could grab it, but not get stuck to it, okay? So I can turn this like this. When I apply pressure, it grabs the gear, but it releases. It's not really stuck to the gear. In fact, I can put this synchronizer ring on the gear and actually tap it in place with a hammer, and it doesn't get stuck to it, okay? It comes right off. That's because even though this is a new ring, this cone is burnished and it's nice and smooth, and it's a certain way the cone really has to be for it to work properly. The ring should be able to again grab the cone of the gear and release. Now, when you take a new gear, this is a brand new gear out of the box. I take this ring, I put it on the gear. It's stuck to it. The reason is that, again, if I put it on and turn it, the ring is actually screwing itself onto the gear. That's because these gears were actually hard turned, and there's a microscopic thread that you don't see on the cone of the gear reacting with the thread on the ring. So as your ring goes against the gear, if you notice one way, the gear is actually screwing itself right onto the cone. So what you have to do is, if you have a lathe, start with like 400 paper and go over the gear cone with some paper. Obviously I'm doing this by hand because I figure most of you don't have a lathe. Then use about 1500 paper and do the same thing. What you're basically doing is just simply polishing the cone of the gear. When you're building a transmission and you're using new gears, you should be doing this. You should be polishing the cone of the gear. And even if you're putting new rings on an old gear, it's a good practice to do this. Kind of cleans up the cone, gets a little bit of the imperfections out of it, makes the ring sit better on the gear. See? Now let's put this ring on here. Let's see what we got. It's much better now. I can hit it. Turn the gear on the ring. Feels a little tight, but it's coming off. Let's do it one more time. Doesn't take much, but sometimes it does take a lot. Sometimes when the cutter comes across the cone of the gear, it actually leaves a sharp edge right at the end here because it can't clear completely. And you may have to relieve this edge either with a grinder or with a file. So sometimes these new gears have a slight lip right on the edge of the cone that can dig into the ring and cause the ring to lock up on the gear. That looks nice and shiny. Also, you want to check for dings and dents in the cone. Make sure that there's no high spots on it. And that looks really nice now. Let's put the ring back on it. It's grabbing it good. You can turn the gear and the ring doesn't screw onto it anymore. So far, so good. Now before I ship any transmission out, I've been using this stuff to prep the rings. It's called Joe Gibbs Driven HVL High Viscosity Lubricant. It's actually a break-in lubricant for engines, but what I really like about this lubricant is that it stays in the grooves of the ring. So what I do is I kind of put this in the ring like this, all the way around. And what this does, it prevents metal-to-metal contact, okay? That looks pretty good. I just want to catch it like this on the gear. Make sure everything is coated with this stuff. You never have enough of it. Again, what's really good about this is kind of stays on the ring and is thin enough. See, if you use regular gear lube, it's a little bit too thick. This is a high viscosity lubricant that's a little bit on the thin side. So it stays in the grooves of the ring. And when you assemble the transmission with this, it'll kind of stay there. So you've got your lockup and your rings won't stick to the gear. That's simple. So if the transmission is staying stationary for a long period of time, or you're going to be using it right away, at least when somebody gets it now and they bench shift it, the ring isn't going to stick to the gear. That looks pretty good. Now in the event that you have a transmission that appears to be stuck in two gears, what you want to do is put the neutral levers of the transmission in their correct neutral positions, and obviously you can't turn the input or you can't turn the output. Let me show you what to do. So the first step is to simply make sure that all your shifter levers, this is the 1, 2, the 3, 4, and the reverse lever, or whatever type of transmission that you're working on, that the shift levers are all in the neutral position. And obviously, because the rings are going to be stuck to the gears, like say it's stuck in first gear and third gear, the input is not going to turn. It's going to be stuck together like this. So what you do is, if you can get a drive shaft yoke, put the drive shaft yoke in the back of the transmission, like this, hold the input shaft, and try to rock it back and forth. Now make sure you have the transmission filled with oil so that the oil can get into the rings and work its way into those little grooves and channels of the synchronizer ring. Because obviously who built it, let it go out completely dry. Usually if you work this back and forth like this, the rings will break loose. And sometimes if you got to tap it a little bit and go back and forth like that and shock it loose, do that. That's all it takes. Once it's free, the yoke will spin independent of the input shaft, and again you have your neutral. So I really like the way this synchronizer ring fits onto the gear. It's got nice smooth release, nice smooth flow to it. There's no notchiness. It's not really grabbing and catching and grabbing and catching. It's just got a good overall feel. And the lubricant really seems to be staying in the ring and staying into the channels and grooves of the ring. I really like that. Now I just remembered that I used to use this Royal Purple Max Tough Assembly Lube, and it says prevents metal-to-metal contact. This stuff worked pretty good too, but the problem was it was a little bit thicker than the HVL from Driven, and what would happen is it would not really get into the little channels of the rings that well, and eventually, if the transmission sat for a bit, it would kind of get out of its way and the rings would end up getting stuck to the gear. So for the short term, this worked pretty good, but for the long term, I didn't like it. And the problem is that companies like Richmond Gear or Tremec are shipping these transmissions out dry, and getting a lot of complaints from people of stuck rings or the appearance of the transmission being stuck in two gears at once. And it's all because of the issue that I mentioned. So I switched over to the HVL again. It works really good. Now again, nobody's paying me for this stuff. I just wanted to show you a little quick tip on what I use and what I do. If it can help you, then it's a good quick tip, right? So thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you soon. Take care.